Hey, welcome back to Anti-Social Studies. My name is Emily Glankler, and today I'm going to be writing for you live right in front of you the 2022 AP World History DBQ. So let's just dive right into it. So just so that we're all clear, I'm using the released prompt from the College Board. So if you go and Google 2022 AP World Exam FRQs for free response questions, they will give you access to this PDF that will show you all of the written response questions. You don't get the multiple choice, unfortunately. So let's go down and look at the DBQ. Our prompt that we're working with is, evaluate the extent to which European imperialism affected economies in Africa and or Asia in the 19th and early 20th centuries. I remember, I kind of predicted this prompt and I was pretty excited about it. So I have made for myself just like a really simple little Google Doc. You can see here a very simple table where I can keep track of my 7 documents, any notes I want to take, and then I have a little column off to the side for like potential, basically analysis, and we'll get into that later. You'll notice too that the very first thing that I've done is I've typed out my prompt on my planning or writing document. You want to have the prompt right in front of you at all times, because one of the biggest mistakes that students make when they're writing these essays is they get distracted, they go off on tangents, and then they kind of forget what the actual prompt was asking. So before I even look at the documents, I'm going to give myself a few minutes to 1, make sure that I really understand what the prompt is asking, and 2, brainstorm things I might already know about this prompt. It can be really tempting to just jump right to document 1 and start digging in, but genuinely it's going to save yourself a lot of time and stress if you just make sure that your mind is kind of settled and situated within the prompt before you do that. Okay. So first, what are the key words of this prompt? So we are focusing on, it's our good old-fashioned evaluate the extent to which questions, which we'll talk about more in a second, but I love these. They're actually really open-ended and really nice for students because you can sort of answer kind of whatever you want. But we are focusing on European imperialism. So specifically out of Europe, we're not really going to be talking about American imperialism. We're not going to be talking about Japanese imperialism. We're talking about its impact on economies. This is the really tricky one. I'm going to make this even bigger. I bet there are a lot of students who are going to go into a lot of really, really great essays that are about the impact of European imperialism in general on these continents and not focus on the economy. And then they're asking us to talk about Africa and or Asia. And that and or is really nice. What that basically means is that if you're looking through the documents and you really only understand the documents from Asia, you could just talk about the ones in Asia and you'd be fine. Obviously, the best, most complex essays are going to talk about both continents, but it's nice of them to give you that and or option. And then we're talking about the 19th and the early 20th centuries. Okay, so we're not going all the way up to today. We're kind of going, I would assume, up through sort of the decolonization era. Okay, so with that in mind, this is a cause and effect essay. This is talking about European imperialism happens. What does it cause? What does it impact related to the economies of Africa and or Asia? So when they're asking you to evaluate the extent to which, you can go in a lot of different directions, but if it's talking about the impact of this event on this region, a really easy place to start is like good things that came out of it and bad things that came out of it, right? And then we can get a little bit more complicated from there. So in general, I happen to kind of know off the top of my head some of the negative impacts on the economy. So I'm sort of just predicting like what are things that I already know could be potential answers. And again, these might come up, these might not. If they don't show up in documents, guess what? I'm also predicting potential outside evidence. Positive impacts, I'm just going to throw something in there. So now what I've done is I've already kind of gotten out of my brain any ideas I might already have. Here's what happens to a lot of students when you write the DBQ, is that as soon as you look at those 7 documents, that is now all you can think of. And so when you're going back and you're trying to think of context, you're trying to think of additional evidence, any other points you can make. It's like as soon as you look at those 7 documents, it sort of pushes any other ideas or thoughts you have out of your head, and now you can't think of anything else. So again, I really like to suggest that you just think, and you might look at this prompt and not know anything, and that's perfectly fine. Then you just jump right into the documents. But if you can take a minute and think through, is there anything I already know? Okay, great. Put it somewhere on your notes so that you get it out of your brain and you remember it for later. All right, now I am going to skim through the documents super fast. So I want us to see how I'm skimming through these documents and how I'm doing it quickly. So what I'm doing now is I am just looking for keywords and phrases in the document that relate specifically to the prompt. So I know, because the College Board isn't going to give us some random document that has nothing to do with the prompt. So I know every single one of these documents is going to have to do with European imperialism in Africa or Asia during this time period. I know that. So now the only thing I'm looking for as I scan and kind of skim these documents is words related to the economy. Anything related to labor, jobs, money, wealth, resources, trade, whatever. Everything else I'm just going to sort of skim past. And then when I see something related to our major theme of the economy, that's when I'm going to stop and read very carefully. The exception to that is I'm going to read our source material word for word. You don't ever want to skim the source material. So if we're looking at document 1, this is T.G. Edwards, don't know who that is. He's the manager of a government-run sugar factory in this part of the Dutch East Indies. It's a letter to the Dutch colonial government in Jakarta. Okay, so I'm just going to make a little note for myself. This is government-run sugar factory manager. And then I'm going to put in the Dutch East Indies. Just for me, basically, especially if you're going to be taking this test or writing a DBQ digitally moving forward, as little as possible as you can be jumping back and forth between documents. That's why I think on wherever you're going to be typing your essay, jotting down notes for yourself too, it's going to make it easier once you get into the writing of the DBQ. Okay, so he says, unfortunately, many of the workers are already forced to work on sugar fields under the Dutch government's cultivation system. I don't know what that is, so I'm going to read the little footnote. It's a system that forced Javanese farmers to work for part of the year to produce cash crops. Okay, so already we're getting some information. We're saying the Dutch government forced Javanese farmers to work on cash crop farms for part of the year. So some forced labor there, kind of reminiscent of the encomienda system, for example. Okay. There's not a single peasant who's not subject to multiple demands on his labor from either the government or from local elites. I've had one of my factory agents, they're looking for workers. I'm offering them good wages. I can't get a lot of workers. Okay, so this is interesting. So sugar factory manager cannot find good workers. Or he didn't say good. He just says cannot find workers because they're forced to work for government cash crop farms or local elites. Okay, this is a really weird document because isn't he the manager? He's part of this government-run system. I guess he's just saying well, cool, you can go out and you can kind of harvest the sugar cane. That's something that this cultivation system is doing. But now I also need workers who are going to come into my factories. So basically what's happened here is that the Dutch government has come in and they've put these excessive demands on the island of Java that really outstrip the workers. It outstrips the people that are on this island that can work. And this is something interesting. I'm going to add this to just analysis because I happen to know, this is a guess, aren't they going to start shipping in workers from other places, like China? I'm pretty sure that's true. I'm gonna have to think about that more later, but I'm pretty sure that this could be a connection to hey, they're gonna have to start, or feel like they're gonna have to start bringing workers in from other places. I'm just going to make a note to myself. So notice what I'm doing is in the notes part of this, I'm just grabbing the basic information that's going to relate to the prompt. But if my brain has a little thought or some little tangent it wants to go off on, I'm just going to jot that down in its own column. And if I have time, I'm going to come back to it later. This also would be important for point of view, because for example, I think this would be great to analyze the point of view because bias, isn't he part of the government that he's complaining about? So again, I'm not going to take too much time right off the bat diving into hipping the documents, evaluating them, analyzing them, but I am going to just make little notes for myself to be hey, Emily, if later you have some time and you want to come back and analyze the point of view, document 1 might be a good one to do that for. All right, let's jump down to document 2. Ooh, it's a chart, either really good or really not good. So the source, the British East India Company, submitted to Parliament total of all goods traded in Indian ports that were under the control of the company. Okay, so exports of Indian textiles to Great Britain have gone down, and imports of British textiles into India have gone up. Great, okay, that makes sense. So we're seeing this is a chart from the British East India Company, and it's basically just showing that British textiles are taking over Indian textile industry. that's all this is really showing. Okay. Great. Let's just move on. By the way, try not to hip charts and graphs unless it's like really clearly problematic in some way. Typically letters, speeches, like person-to-person documents tend to be way better to evaluate for source information. So for now, I'm not even going to really think about the source of that chart. I'm just going to get the information from it and move on. Document 3 is this person, an Indian journalist and intellectual. It's published in a Bengali language newspaper in India. Okay, I know very little about this topic, about this person, about this culture. Okay. We pay for what we buy from England by exporting Indian commodities. It goes without saying that as the trade with England expands, so will the demand for these commodities. Ever since the establishment of British rule, the trade of India has increased and expanded agriculture. So this person seems to be saying that European imperialism has been good for the Indian economy, I think. But let me read through and just see if there's anything that contradicts that. Cotton weaving trade may have collapsed, but why does the weaver not move to another occupation? People in our country are reluctant to give up their hereditary trades. Okay, so this is a like pro-European imperialism from a native. So basically what they're saying is imperialism has led to growth in the economy if people are willing to move to new jobs. And to me, document 3 connects back to our chart in document 2. So again, I'm going to put a little note here of like connect with document 2, because basically the trend that we're seeing in the chart that, hey, yeah, like the import of British textiles has kind of decimated the Indian textile industry. That corroborates, it confirms what this person is saying in document 3. But this person is giving us a little bit more nuance of at least their interpretation of whether that's overall bad or not so much. Okay, I'm just going to put over here like this is an interesting point of view, because you would expect if this is an Indian journalist and intellectual, they're from India, they're publishing this in a Bengali language newspaper, I would have kind of assumed this would be an anti-imperialism article, but it's not, it's the opposite. So again, do I have to write about that? No, but I'm going to make a note to myself off to the side that if I want to explore that more, it could be interesting. Document 4. This is the ruler of these people of present-day Zimbabwe. It's a contract with business associates of the businessman Cecil Rhodes. We know Cecil Rhodes. Okay, so this is a contract between the Ndebele tribe and Rhodes's mining company. This is going to be interesting. This is a legal document, so just an interesting point of view. It's not quite the same. You're not maybe going to get like a true opinion on this. You're just going to see kind of the surface level relationship that was established. Let it be known that this guy, and this guy have made a contract with me. Again, this me as being the ruler of the tribe. Agreed to pay me and my heirs a monthly sum. They're going to give me rifles. They've promised to deliver a steamboat with guns to defend my territory. In exchange, I'm giving them complete and exclusive right to collect, sell, and enjoy all the metals and minerals. No! Don't sell mineral rights for like 1,000 rifles. Okay, since I've been much pestered lately by people seeking those rights, I grant them the right to take all necessary measures to exclude their competitors. Oh no, he is just opening the door. Okay, so this is basically saying ruler of the tribe is giving away all mineral rights in exchange for money, guns, steamboats, and giving Rhodes's people free range to like drive out competitors. Okay. I don't know what I want to put over here, but I have lots of feelings about this. I'm just gonna say like selling out his tribe. Like, and which again, I don't necessarily think that's true, and we're gonna analyze this later on. It's way more complex and nuanced than that. But again, if you're reading a document, you should be paying attention to two things. You should be paying attention to just the basic information you're getting. Okay, what's the relationship, the agreement that he agreed to? And then if you have a feeling about it, if you feel like that's a really bad decision, you should make note of that somewhere, because that could turn into analysis, right? What analysis and reasoning basically means in these essays is the College Board wants to know what you, the historian, think about this. So if you have a reaction like I just had, where I'm reading this document going, no, like, don't go into the basement, right? It feels like you're watching a horror movie. Make note of that somewhere, and like leave yourself some space to maybe explore that in your writing, because it's not necessary. You don't have to have like strong opinions on this to write a decent DBQ. But if you really want to get that like complexity point, those analysis and reasoning points, that's really like an easy way into those. Okay, so we're just going to move on. Document 5. This is a Congolese refugee, testimony given to the Belgian government as part of a larger investigation into the condition of his population. I'm assuming he's going to be complaining. I'm assuming he's going to be negative about this, because from what I know about the Belgian Congo is that the working conditions were terrible. So we had to produce 80 loads of rubber. The white man reduced the required amount only by a little. No pay. We got cloth and salt. Okay. The pay was given to the chief, never to the men. This seems like an interesting connection with the document that we just read, that like the chief and his heirs are going to get money in perpetuity, but what about the rest of his tribe? Okay, basically he's just talking about how terrible these working conditions are. We could be killed. We starve. Wild animals killed us. Oh my gosh. We begged the white man, but they refused. Okay, so this one's pretty terrible and straightforward. Terrible working conditions in Belgian Congo rubber plantations. Yeah, and I'm going to put up here, like, audience is really interesting. I mean, this is like testimony to the Belgian government. And I say that because, like, this is really brave of this Congolese refugee to testify this plainly, right? While, I'm going to add this to it, like, while this is going on. So this testimony is not happening in like the 1960s, 70s, 80s as we reflect on it. This is happening in 1904. This is still at the height of the age of imperialism. So if I was going to analyze this source, this could be a really interesting one, because this, to me, is a very valuable, highly trusted source. Because think about how dangerous it could be for this person to be giving this testimony to the Belgian government about how their own government and their own people are treating these people at the time. So for it to be that kind of brave and dangerous, I now trust it a lot more, right? He's going out on a limb. He doesn't have a lot to gain from giving this testimony. He actually has a lot to lose. Okay. Document 6 is a member of, this same group from Zimbabwe that we read the contract about. It's an oral memoir of his experiences recorded by an anti-colonial activist published in 1936. Immediately, I'm like, we should hip this document, because there's so many layers to this source. It's literally like, I'm just going to make a note to myself, hip this document, and I'll come back to it later, because we're talking about an indigenous point of view, a memoir of his experiences 40 years ago, recorded by an activist, published right on the eve of decolonization. This is like, you could write a whole book just about this source and all the different layers of potential value, but also bias of this source. Okay. After our rebellion had been put down, they rebelled. So these are the same people from document 4. So I kind of want to look at the years here. They rebelled in the 1896, 1897. When was this contract? 1888. Boom. This is a really cool way to connect different documents together. So this contract is in 1888. This is now saying in 1896, there was a revolt. And I'm just going to make a note to myself, connect to document 4. Because what this is doing now is we're able to connect these two documents together and be like, hey, we saw that contract in document 4, and my instinct was, this seems pretty bad. This seems like the people of his tribe are not going to be happy with this, or that the people of Cecil Rhodes' company are going to take advantage of this. And now we're getting some confirmation in document 6 that that is true, that there's going to be some revolt against the white settlers that's going to fail and lead to more and more of their land and rights being taken away. Again, this is something we sort of knew generally was happening in this part of Africa, but to have these two documents so close together and to like directly corroborate that narrative, That's what the College Board is talking about when they want to see complexity, right? They want to see that you're able to put these documents all together and you're not just dealing with each of them in its own vacuum. You're like seeing the bigger picture, right? You're kind of like hunting that serial killer with the red yarn and you're like putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. Okay, so now let's read about this document. After our rebellion had put down, we were offered work in the mines. We were able to buy back some cattle. Oh, is this the cattle killing rebellion? Is this the same thing? I'm going to put off to the side. Cattle killing movement? Is this the same group? Because they're saying like the cattle that have been lost in the rebellion. Interesting. That could be historical context. We were not used to working for a wage, so we went to work, but then the taxes came. Taxes. The government told us we were living on private land. They wanted rent. Oh, man. Okay. So this is basically saying the revolt failed. They followed instructions of the British government, took jobs, but then were taxed, had to pay rent, etc. Okay. So basically they're getting kind of wrapped into this capitalist system where the British government clearly has come in and is taking over more and more control of the land and the economy, which again, we knew was happening, but this is a very specific viewpoint on it. All right, last document. Anonymous Tanzanian participant in this uprising against German colonial rule, interviewed by African historians from the newly independent Tanzania, published in 1967. Again, hip. This is like the time period this is published in is going to be really important. Published by African historians after decolonization. So the reason why I say that that's interesting is that we should be slightly wary of this document. Not that I think this document is going to be false or incorrect, but the point of view of this document is very clearly from the outset anti-colonial. I mean, very clearly, it's literally going to be African historians trying to go back and tell their side of the story and to maybe promote nationalism in this new independent Tanzania. And they're looking back on this uprising. So again, the further away we get from an actual event that's occurring, the more and more layers of like perspective get added to our understanding of that event. That doesn't mean that then we think that this testimony we're about to read is false. It just means it's really complex. And so it'd be a really good one for us to maybe discuss and analyze if we wanted to do that. All right, 1902, German cotton plantations in our district. We were allotted days where we had to work on these plantations. Oh, this is very similar to what we heard in, I think, the very first document. So forced labor, similar to document 1. This work made us suffer. We were whipped, no break, tons of really hard work. The Germans also wanted us to pay them taxes. This is sort of a culmination of a lot of things. Brutal working conditions like we saw in the one about the Belgian Congo, document 5. Forced taxes like we see in document 6. So document 7 is going to do a lot of work for us because we can connect it in different ways to multiple documents throughout our essay. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on the notes that I've taken, right? What I want to do is I want to now think through an overarching outline for this essay without having to go back and like read word for word these documents too many times. If I have questions and I want to go back into them, I can. But for now, I want to actually focus most of my time on the notes that I've taken and just trust that I've gleaned some information from each of these documents that I can do something with. Okay, so what I'm seeing very clearly is I went back, I'm going to go back and read the prompt again, and I'm going to look at my prediction. My prediction was we could talk about negative impacts and positive impacts. And if we're going to take that, then, I mean, we really only have this one. Document 3 seems to be positive. All the others are negative. So to me, I might want a little bit more of a nuanced grouping of the documents. But let me start going into my potential outline. So positive impacts, I could talk about document 3, overall economic growth. But really the others are all kind of negative impacts. And so let me see with the other 6 documents if there's a way that I can divide these into maybe 2 groups. That could be 2 body paragraphs that would make a little bit more sense. So I'm going to look back over. We had forced labor, so much forced labor in Dutch Java that they can't even find workers. We have, taking over local industries, giving away mineral rights, terrible working conditions. Here's what I'm thinking. I'm going to say like short-term negative impacts on individual workers and then long-term negative impacts on like the society and civilization as a whole. And let me show you kind of what I mean by that. So we have like on individual workers and on the indigenous society civilization. And so if that's the case, then bad impacts on the workers would be like document 1, they're being so overworked and stretched thin. It would be document 5, and then the document 6. 1, document 5, document 6. So again, document 1, Java workers stretched too thin. Document 5 is Congo rubber, which I just kind of know what that means. It's really bad. And then document 6 is taxation rent. Okay, and then on the society and civilization in general, we can look at the chart from document 2. We can say like overtaking local industry. We can look at that atrocious contract, right? Document 4, giving away long-term mineral rights, control of the land. And then document 7 can honestly go almost anywhere, right? I mean, we could throw document 7 in both. Forced labor, actually, it really just makes sense in this one. Brutal conditions, taxes. Okay, so again, it's totally fine that I have 3 groups that are uneven, right? One group only has 1 document, one group has 4, one group has 2. That's all totally fine. So now what I'm going to do, and this is the real benefit to being able to type your essay, is that I'm not going to worry about my introduction yet. I'm going to do that last. I'm just going to start building my body paragraphs. So what I'm going to do is literally just take this outline and say, European imperialism negatively impacted indigenous workers who were now overworked, mistreated, and forced to pay taxes on land that used to be theirs. That's just going to be my overall kind of topic sentence. And now I'm just going to go down and start adding in my information from each document. In Dutch Java, the demands on workers was so great that the Dutch government complained they couldn't even find anyone to work in factories despite offering them good wages. Document 1. Now, I've addressed document 1. I want to be really clear here, right? Like, you do not have to repeat and recite and cover everything from a document to use it. What I'm doing here, if you notice, is I'm like skimming the document. I'm taking it down into kind of my general notes. Now I'm like really focusing in on the specific argument that I'm trying to make, and I'm gleaning just the information I need from that document distilled down for my argument. So is there a lot of document 1 that I have not talked about here? Yeah, of course. But there's enough that the reader knows that I understood that document. I'm not talking in generalities, right? And it is also very clear how this applies to my argument that workers are being mistreated, right? It's so bad that even if the government is offering them good wages, which they say they are, they can't find anyone to work, right? For now, I'm going to just move on to the next document. This is my strategy, is get through all the documents you know and understand, and then go back and add in your analysis, add in your more kind of complicated arguments. But first, get your basic ideas out in complete sentences. Okay. Similarly, Congolese workers were brutalized while working in rubber plantations. They were often, actually, I don't need to, were brutalized while working in rubber plantations run by the Belgian government. Were they run by the Belgian government, or is this like a private company? This is where I might want to go back into document 5 and just clarify. They just kind of say like the white man. So maybe I'll just say what they said. Run by the, quote, white man. Document 5. In Southern Africa, indigenous people at first took on new working opportunities offered by the British. Over time, however, they realized that they were becoming trapped in a cycle of debt, taxation, and rent payments on land that historically belonged to them. Document, which one was that? 6. Okay. All right. And then finally, document 7 shows all of these mistreatments compiled in one, is it an interview? Yeah, in one interview. Germans whipped indigenous laborers for the smallest offense, kept them in brutal conditions, and forced them to pay taxes. Document 7. Okay, I want to pause here because I want to point a few things out. This is not a super complex argument right now. I'm literally just saying, if we go back to our prompt, I'm literally saying European imperialism affected the economies of Africa and Asia by mistreating workers. It's a pretty simplistic argument. It's also a correct argument, but it's fairly simplistic, and that's okay. One of the things to notice about the DBQ is that you do not need to get a 7 out of 7 to get a good score on this essay. If you're getting 4 points out of the 7 on this essay on your AP exam, you're doing a really good job, right? And so just addressing 3 documents gets you a point. Using 6 documents to apply to your argument gets you 2 points, right? And then there's these other ones too, like adding in a thesis statement, adding in context. And so what I always suggest, especially if you're someone where DBQs don't come super naturally to you, is first just get the basic argument out of your brain. A lot of us, we try so hard to make an argument sound super fancy and complicated right out the gates that we totally lose the thread and we just write nonsense, right? I've written those essays, I've read those essays where I can tell what argument you're trying to make, but it's so convoluted and complicated that I'm like, I don't even know if you read the documents. So first, get the simple parts out onto the paper. What does this document say about this prompt? Great, move on to the next one. And do that for all of the documents that make sense to you. That might be all 7. It might only be 3 or 4. Get those out on the page first. Then you can take a breath, right? You can look at the clock and go, oh, I still have 30 minutes left. Now I can go in and try to make sense of some of these maybe more complicated thoughts I'm having in my brain, or I can go back and try to figure out what the heck the other documents we're talking about. So simple is fine, as long as it's clear that you understand what the document was saying. All right, so we have body paragraph number 1. Now I'm going to indent down. European, I'm going to be super simplistic. European imperialism negatively impacted the long-term development of indigenous societies in Africa and Asia by stripping them of their sovereignty. I want to go back and look at the chart now because I want to see what was the time span of that chart. It was, oh gosh, it's only 20 years. That's really fast. Okay. In just 20 years, the British decimated the local textile industry of India, replacing it with imported British fabrics made in new industrial factories, which is kind of a little bit of outside evidence, so I might explore that a little bit more if I have time. I'm actually going to kind of like highlight that for me, because if I explore that more, I could either get historical context for that document, or I could maybe like actually get a full additional evidence point. But for now, I just want to get my ideas on the page. Okay. Across Africa, many tribes were forced or tricked into signing one-sided contracts that allowed European companies to, and I'm going to put this in quotes, legally, right, take control of indigenous land and other valuable resources. Document 4. I'm fine with that. If I'm going super simplistically, my second body paragraph right now has 3 sentences, but you'll see I'm going to go back and add in. Okay, so now I have my 2 main body paragraphs. I still have this one document I haven't talked about, this one outlier that's saying like, but hey, overall our economy's growing. I'll throw this into the conclusion. For now, I'm going to go back, and now that I've written my basic body paragraphs, I'm going to write out my thesis statement. So what I'm essentially arguing is, overwhelmingly, 6 out of 7 documents, right? Overwhelmingly, the impact of European imperialism on the economies of Africa and Asia was negative. Notice what I did there. I just restated the prompt, but put in my evaluation. It was overwhelmingly negative. That's my answer. Remember, a thesis statement has to have 2 things. It has to have an answer, which I have. It was negative. It can be that simple. And then it has to have a line of reasoning, which is me kind of introducing what these body paragraphs are going to say. Not only did the European businesses and governments severely mistreat individual workers, European imperialism, let me just go back to my topic sentence, stunted the long-term growth of indigenous societies by stripping them of their sovereignty, right? So again, if I'm having a hard time thinking of like, wait, what is my thesis? I can now just go back to my topic sentences that I wrote while those documents were fresh in my brain. But again, this is not going to be the most beautiful essay I've ever written. This is not the essay I'm going to send off to colleges to show them what a great writer I am. All the College Board wants to know is, can I see this question, look at 7 documents, come up with an answer to the question they've asked. That's all they're asking. It doesn't have to be this like beautifully worded essay. It can just be pretty straightforward. The impact was negative. They mistreated workers. They took away the rights of the societies. Done. And then document 1 shows this, document 2 shows this. Great. So now I have my basic essay. I have a thesis statement that I think is pretty good, and I've used 6 documents. So that's already a 3 out of 7. I'm feeling very good about that. Now, I want to add in context, because context for an essay like this could be relatively easy. So if we go back to our prompt, historical context for an essay, it needs to contextualize something specific from the prompt. So it's not just general, like, here's what imperialism was, right? Our focus is on imperialism and the economies of Africa and Asia. So I want to zoom out of one of those things. I could either go a little bit back in time. I could go to the 18th and 19th centuries and say, where did this European imperialism come from? Why did they want to get involved in the economies of Asia or Africa? That would be the simplest context. So let's just do that. Just as a side note, I could also zoom out from maybe Africa or Asia or Europe. I could say like, hey, while this is going on with the European kind of scramble for Africa, that sort of thing, I could say like the United States and Japan are having their own kind of competition for economic growth in the Pacific. So I could like zoom out and say, hey, here's something that's happening somewhere else that is going to confirm this trend. But I always think when you can, the easier one is just to go back in time a little bit and be like, how did we get here? So now I'm going to go in, I'm going to add that before my thesis statement. So notice I'm writing this essay backwards. I wrote the body paragraphs first. Get like the basic kind of meat of the essay out there and out of your brain. And then you can go in and kind of very like almost surgically go in and add and insert these different points in a way that like makes sense. Okay. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to answer the question now of like, why did the Europeans want to get involved in the economies of Africa and Asia? Industrialization. That's the answer, right? The Industrial Revolution, beginning in England in the 18th century, sparked a competition between various European powers for global dominance. Okay, there needs to be more than just one sentence. I need to like show I actually understand what I just meant by that sentence. I need to like put in specific evidence, specific information, so that the reader knows I'm not just kind of like saying a bunch of fluff, right? In order to feed the growing factories back home, England and eventually other states like Germany and Belgium and the Netherlands, which are the 4 other countries we're going to talk about in this essay, needed ever-growing access to raw materials for as cheaply as possible. While they could attempt to negotiate trade deals with the indigenous communities of Africa and Asia, over time they decided it was simpler to just take direct control over the local economies to maximize profits. As a bonus, as a European country's empire grew, so did its markets. Now, not only could England get cheap access to raw cotton, for example, but they also could turn around and sell manufactured textiles as a monopoly to their new imperial subjects. So I'm making it like very clear, very detailed. This might be overkill, but very detailed of like that I understand how we got here. If you take the prompt, European imperialism impacting the economies of these places, that's the prompt. I need to make it really clear to the College Board that I know how we ended up here. I know why we ended up to the point that a country like England or Germany or Belgium or wherever is going to just directly take over the economy. Now, they're going to use other reasons to justify it. They're going to use white supremacy. They're going to use social Darwinism. Those are all things you could have talked about in context. But for me, I like to keep it simple. If I'm talking about the impact of Europeans in the economies of these places, then the easiest context is to talk about the cause. Why did they end up there in the first place? Okay, so now I feel really good. Now I feel like I have context, I have thesis, I've used 6 documents. I have a 4 out of 7. And I would look at the clock, and I would look and realize I still have 15 minutes left, right? And so now, basically, until the clock runs out, I'm going to go and try and add as many possible potential points as I can. Now, I could go in and add an analysis of document 3, but honestly, it's more worth that doesn't get me another point anywhere, right? There's no point for using all 7 documents as opposed to all 6. I could put it in there, I guess, to just make sure in case I misunderstood one of the documents, but I don't think I did. Actually, what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to try to think first. The easiest point to get on top of all these basic points, if you know something, is additional evidence. So what I need to think about for a second is, can I think of an additional specific example of European imperialism negatively impacting the economies of Africa or Asia in this time period? It can't just be like a fun fact related to this topic. It has to be its own separate thing. So let me think for a second. I know India, but we've already talked about India and cotton. I don't know that I know anything else very specific. Ooh, I know Indian salt, because I know Gandhi did the salt march because Indians were not allowed to harvest their own salt. They had to buy it from the British government. Done. Maybe I'll add it to the one about British and India. I'll just add it there because I kind of want these 2 paragraphs to be balanced, even though it doesn't totally matter. Okay. Even a product as simple and ubiquitous, good word, Emily, as salt was not immune from British conquest. Ooh, that's a good sentence. That was a good one. Okay. The British came to control so much of the Indian economy that they even banned Indian people from harvesting their own salt from the seas. Later, on in the early 20th century, this would become the basis for Gandhi's most famous act of nonviolent resistance, the Salt March. So again, I don't have to go into a whole analysis of the Salt March because that's not the point of the essay. This is a really good example of a possible tangent. I could see a lot of students, if they had the same idea, they're like, oh, India, salt, Gandhi, I could talk about that. You might get distracted and you might go into a whole analysis of Gandhi and his nonviolent resistance and the Salt March. But you have to remember, that's not the topic of this essay. The topic of the essay is the impact on the economy. So I just want to focus on the salt. Like, focus on the cause of the Salt March, that it was this economic oppression that people in India couldn't even harvest their own salt. They had to go through the British monopoly. So now I feel pretty good that I have an additional piece of evidence. I also just thought of another one, which is Egypt and like the Suez Canal. So let's just add that one in for good measure too, just in case. You really only need one additional piece of evidence, but why not? If I can think of another one, I should add another one in just in case. So this goes really well with Africa signing away rights on the other side of the continent. Egypt was technically independent, finally free from Ottoman control, but they quickly fell under the influence of the British and the French, who offered investment in their new Suez Canal in exchange for shipping rights. Is that enough? Is that enough information? This is another example of Europeans taking advantage of African governments. Egypt was in the midst of an economic crisis because of declining cotton prices. Oh, I could go real complex. Okay, this is where I could earn my complexity point actually, because whoa. Declining cotton prices partly because of the industrialized cotton that's coming from England. Okay, Egypt was in the midst of an economic crisis because of declining cotton prices, ironically, partly brought on by industrial textile factories in England. And so they were forced to bring in outside support to maintain new economic infrastructure. Okay, now I feel pretty good that like that outside evidence point is very clear. Okay, so now I only have a few minutes left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and look at my HIP and see if there were three that I could try to HIP really quickly. The point of view bias, he's complaining about the government he's a part of. That'd be an easy one. So let me find where I talked about document 1 and just add this in. The point of view of this document is somewhat ironic because it is a Dutch government employee complaining about the Dutch government forcing the Javanese people to work on their plantations. Without that forced labor, his sugar factory would probably not run. Also, we should question whether or not he actually offered the Javanese workers good wages like he claims. In a letter to the Dutch government, his employer, he probably is not going to openly admit to underpaying or otherwise mistreating his workers. So again, that might be wrong. Here's the thing a lot of students get hung up on is they're like, but I don't know. I don't know if that's right or not. Well, it doesn't really matter because what we want to see and what the College Board wants to see is they want to see your reasoning. They want to see, can you look at a document and at least pose questions? So I don't know this guy. I don't know if he's telling the truth or not. Maybe he really was offering them pretty good wages and he still just couldn't find any workers. And I'm not necessarily saying like this guy's a total liar and this document is biased and we should just throw it out. What I'm saying is like, well, if I were to explore this more, I would want to find some other documents to like find out if he's actually paying them, offering them really good wages or not. So again, part of analysis and reasoning it's not always having the answers, it's asking really good questions and being like, well, as I look at this document, this poses another question that I have. And if you can show that you're going through that thought process as you're working through the documents, that's one of the things the College Board wants to see when they're looking for those complex points. All right, so I've done that for one. I need to do it for 2 more, which is why the hit point is so hard. Maybe I'm going to do the audience of document 5 I said was a really good one. So this document is especially valuable and moving because of how brave the author, author in quotes, had to be to tell this story. He is giving damning testimony about the Belgian government's mistreatment of indigenous workers to the Belgian government, while, lots of italics here, right, while the mistreatment in theory is continuing. The Congo is still under the control of Belgium. It's possible that testimony like this was part of the reason that the Belgian government took control away from their own king, Leopold, and began administering the territory under parliamentary rule. That's another like outside piece of evidence. Again, I'm throwing that in there. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but it's something that I know. So what I'm showing is I'm showing them like, hey, I know the connection here. This might be some of the testimony that led the Belgian government to make that decision. I'm not sure. I don't remember the year that that happened. And again, I don't know if this is a whole additional evidence point. Maybe it's context. Maybe it's something else. The point for when you're writing these DBQs is that you don't have to decide what point that is. If you have some other idea and you're like, oh, this is something else I know about this that I think is valuable, when in doubt, just put it on the page and let the reader decide what it is or isn't. Right? So even if you'd gone on that tangent earlier about Gandhi and the Salt March, fine. Maybe the reader would count that as some additional piece of evidence. I don't know. So there's no harm in putting more ideas down on the page. It's always better to write too much than not enough because it gives the reader something to work with. Right? If you have an idea on your head, but you don't put it on the page, the reader can't give you a point for it. All right, let's see if I can really quickly fit in one more hip. The very last one published after decolonization, document 7, that would be a good one. This document was compiled by African historians looking to tell their side of the story of European imperialism after that era had ended. It is an important example of indigenous people telling their side of the story, but it's also possible that they are reinforcing the mistreatment by Europeans in order to unite the indigenous people in the new nation of Tanzania. So again, I'm just kind of pointing out that I can see that this document might be serving more than one purpose, right? Yes, it's to document what happened to the indigenous people under the German government, but because of when it's being made, it's being compiled by historians in the 1960s, and it's in the newly independent Tanzania, there might be another purpose, which is also to like start telling this nationalist story of like, okay, we might all be these different tribes, these different ethnic groups, but we all were sort of mistreated by the Europeans. I'm actually going to add that in order to unite previously disconnected indigenous people in the new nation of Tanzania by emphasizing their shared history of mistreatment by Germany. Great. Okay. I feel pretty good about this. I never got a chance to really analyze the made and new industrial factories. That's totally fine. I never even talked about document 3, which again is totally fine. I feel pretty good. I feel like this could be a 5 or a 6, depending on the day and depending on how everyone else did. But what I want you to notice is my approach to this, which I think is going to be even more useful once we start doing more and more digital exams and you're typing your essays is that you can sort of Frankenstein your essay together, right? You can go through and do your first pass of like, let me just get the basic ideas out there of what these documents say. And then I can go back in and I can insert my own analysis. Now, if you're still handwriting these essays, which a lot of us might be doing in our classes and even on the AP exam, that's okay. You can still take this approach. We are totally fine, and the College Board is totally fine with you writing arrows, with you having things be out of order, right? We just grade what is on the page. How it's organized, how it flows, doesn't really matter. It's nice when it flows, it's nice when it's well organized, but you're not getting any points for it, and you're not getting points taken off if it's a little bit messy. So whether you're typing or you're handwriting, you can still take this approach. Get your ideas out on the page. Spend the first half of the time just making sure you can get the basics there. Do you have two body paragraphs? Do you have two kind of main arguments where you're using ideally 6 of the documents to support that argument? Then once you get that on the page, you can take a deep breath and you can go in and start adding in as many points as you can until your time runs out. And with that, my time is up. Thank you for joining me. I hope this was helpful. You can go follow the link in the comment section where you can see I'm going to like tidy this up and make this a perfect essay. And I'm going to share with you kind of my sample response and annotation of exactly where I think I would have gotten the context point, that sort of thing. So like and follow, subscribe to my YouTube channel, go to my website to check out more resources, and thanks. Good luck.